Hello, all of my lovers in the house. Hello, hello. I'm excited today to bring you an IG Live with Nadia Bolz-Weber. Here she is. Hello. Let's see. How do the classic. Okay, here we go. Perfect. And the magic. Hello. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good.
Amazing. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
I was just going to share with everybody that we're here to celebrate the release of our podcast interview with you that went live yesterday, and to celebrate what here at BBXX we are calling Sexual Liberation Month. And of course, we're always celebrating the life-changing magic of liberating yourself from shame. So thanks so much for being a part of this celebration. And I wanted to just have a few questions and we'll see where this takes us. Sound
Cool.
good? Okay, perfect. So in our, I'm sure for all of the people who follow you and for anybody tuning in from BBXX, I wanted to just invite you to share a bit about yourself for context and to share why you think this topic of shame, sexual liberation, and also kind of the influence of religion is important to everybody, regardless of their religious affiliation or lack thereof.
Yeah. Well, I think my basic concern for all of this comes in two varieties. One is pastoral. As a clergy person, like seeing the harm that the teachings of the church did in the developing sexual psyches of my parishioners and how much shame that they carried around because of bullshit that the church taught them. And then secondly is personal because of my own story and my own experiences. So, and even if people aren't, even if people weren't raised crazy conservative Christian like I was, it's still like in the ether in our culture. I mean, a lot of that stuff we just kind of absorb from the culture, even if we weren't raised in the pews. The idea of what sexual purity is, what a good girl is, what's okay to do, what's not okay, how you should feel. Also, I mean, our culture itself gives us really fucked up messages about desirability and bodies and sex as well. I mean, it's not solely on the shoulders of the church. I mean, our society is continually barraging us with images of the type of bodies that are worthy of desire. And it's a very narrow margin, but constantly being shown this is the body that's worthy of desire. I mean, so much so that here I am, 52 years old, having the best sex of my life. And if you had told me that at 20, I'd be like, oh my, middle-aged people don't have sex. I mean, even that, like we don't even have images, normalized images for, desire and sex and eroticism for people 40 even.
Yeah. And even like you said, pop culture, do you hear music, top hits about, people post 40, post 60 having great sex? Or thankfully in the movies, it's starting to make its way in. I remember last summer seeing, actually it was a Chilean film called Gloria, and seeing like hot, fun hookup sex in a film about older people. And I was like, where has this been all my life?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, sexuality, eroticism, desire, it's endless in its variety. And yet we're only sort of served certain flavors of it. And then we think if that's not how we are naturally, something must be wrong with us.
Yeah, of course, it's our fault. And we should feel shameful. It's, yeah. And it's
Exactly.
like that fast food. We're serving like this tiny little taste or the edge or the fast version rather than like, oh no, this is a meal. This is like 18-course meal throughout your life with multiple rounds of dessert and different things. I always relate sexuality and desire to, you know, everything else in your life. It's the same. There are ups, there are downs. You change your style and clothing, your preferences in food, your preferences in partner, of course, your preferences in everything, including sex and desire, are also going to change and evolve and mature, you know, maturity for some reason when it has to do with people and like getting older, we don't, even though we should, see as this amazing growing into yourself and learning and the wisdom and the confidence.
The confidence. Oh my God, I'm so not hung up like I used to be. I mean, the lack of self-consciousness, you know, like I'm not self-conscious as a sexual partner in a way that I was definitely self-conscious in my, 20s. So
yeah, that kind of self-confidence, self-assurance, and just tuning out all the noise that keeps trying to get itself in the way of you and like enjoying life and being human.
Right.
Yeah. And you kind of touched on that body image, but one of my favorite stories to share with people is when I was traveling with my aunt, who's now in her late 60s, and we were getting ready to go to the pool, and she was just sitting there putting on her swimsuit. She was like, you know, when I was young, like I was really skinny, I had a great body, whatever, and like I never felt good about it ever. Yeah. And I didn't enjoy it, and I was always trying to change it. And you know, I've never felt better about my body than I do now. It's not, you know, the most traditionally great body or whatever, but I'm so grateful for everything it's given me and all of the like opportunities and what it's allowed me. Like, I love my body. My body is amazing. And I just was like, how can everyone in the world get like those 60 odd years of like perspective faster?
Totally. And not to mention the amount of energy and money and emotional stress that especially women waste on wishing our bodies were different. I mean, there's $1 billion industry that's really reliant on the dissatisfaction of our bodies. Yeah. And like if women could funnel all of that into climate change and like education, like it would change the whole planet. Yeah. Unfortunately, we're busy trying to lose 5 fucking pounds, you know?
Which like we won't even remember. And even if we do, then you'll be like, oh, I'm too skinny. Your butt's no longer big enough. You lost weight, so now your butt isn't big enough. Whatever it is. Like there's endless criticism that we and the world around us can create about ourselves. Yeah. So and that part how you said, you know, it's not just religion but pop culture, and then the relationship between culture and faith and religion and all of that. You know, I always tell people, okay, yeah, separation of church and state, but what's printed on our dollar bill, the currency on which the country and debatably the world, and like unfortunately we as capitalistic brainwashed humans run, it has printed "in God we trust." So, you know, even if somebody doesn't identify as necessarily being religious, this all shapes the world around us. And I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I grew up, you know, I wouldn't consider it religious, but I did, you know, I was actually baptized, confirmed, first communion confirmed, and all of that. I did go to a Jesuit high school, but it was in such a liberal area, and you know, we never really identified as being religious. And yet, whether how much of it had to do with religion or not, I had this moment at 20 years old where I was like, wow, this aha moment when I discovered my clitoris and masturbated for the first time in my life. And I was like, I had no idea how much shame I was holding on to. My entire world has been backwards. And like, I had no clue how much it had really subtly and subconsciously, you know, again, whether how much was from any religion or a lot of it, like the conversations around me, even in high school and even among girls and women, debatably, just as negative conversations about body, about pleasure, about sex, sexuality, whatever. And that moment of thinking, wow, how have I been holding on to this much shame and where did it come from? And that was really, the beginning of this whole thing that now years later has become BBXX. So I totally relate to all of this and trying to help people recognize whether at this moment they know it or not. Sometimes you don't know what you're holding on to until you let go of it.
Right.
So what role did that in your personal story that you kind of alluded to? How would you describe like the way that shame and liberation was able to transform your relationship with yourself and everybody else?
Well, if I'm honest, I was raised such conservative Christian where all of the teachings about what it meant to be good and not going too far and saving yourself for marriage and all that purity stuff. And, girls should not wear anything low cut because that would really tempt the boys, and, all of these messages, like basically don't wear tight clothes or revealing clothes. Don't, lean in too much to it. Like basically constantly being told that as a girl, you are responsible for the sexual arousal of boys. And that once they're aroused past a certain point, they can't help themselves. So, rape culture and purity culture being very, very, very intertwined. And I was raised with all of that. And I don't have an explanation for this, but somehow all that stuff didn't really pass the blood-brain barrier. Like somehow once I had sex for the first time when I was 17, I was so lucky because my first partner was somebody who was a few years older and really experienced and a really generous lover. And like, so my first experience with sex was really great. And I somehow I didn't have the like, oh, I'm so ashamed. Like I didn't have that. I was like, oh, this is for me. Like this is definitely my thing now. And so I was immediately just like, I'm good with this. I love this. What it did do was create a lot of secrecy in my life. So what happened was because I was raised in that subculture, I had no adults to talk to. I had nobody who was a non-anxious presence in the face of conversations about sex that could be very matter of fact with me, that could give me good advice. And so in a sense, what it caused was secrecy and separation because of that. And so there was nobody to ask questions. There was no one to support me or help me in that time. So that's what happened with me. But then having the way it did show up was just later, when I was ordained, I had to sign a piece of paper that said that I would be faithful in marriage or celibate in singleness. And I was married at the time, and it wasn't a problem because I was celibate in marriage. I was like in this sexless marriage. And so I didn't think about it until we went through a very friendly divorce. And when Eric, my partner, and I got together 5 years ago, when I was having sex again, and it was with somebody I was really had incredible chemistry with, it was a completely different experience, and it felt like this exfoliation of my entire spirit. And I thought it just felt incredible. And then I was like, why did the church make me sign a piece of paper saying I wouldn't do this? So even the ELCA, which is a really progressive denomination in a lot of ways, still has this holdover. And it's not even our theology. I think we borrowed it from the Baptists. I'm like, can we give it back? That's not even how we think about things. But that's when it kind of broke down, and when I decided to write Shameless was because of that.
Yeah. The exfoliation of my entire spirit. I love that. Really, like, allows you to really feel that. And I think it's amazing how you were able to, again, it didn't break the blood brain barrier or navigate your way around these things or realize, oh no, this makes me feel good. So if this makes me feel good, this can't be that bad. Versus there are so many people who they can't even get to the point where they allow themselves to feel good. There's so much of that kind of guilt and shame and that point about rape culture and purity culture being intertwined is fascinating. But that, and either way, even though you were able to break through that, I feel good, so this can't be that bad. But the cognitive dissonance or the secrecy and separation, like you mentioned, that creates where it's like, okay, but even if I in my own life can manage to navigate this, I still can't engage in the conversations, the dialogue that is needed to, say here at BBXX, change the culture and the conversations surrounding intimacy and relationships and raise the bar as a whole. You're kind of siphoned off and, okay, you're saved from a part of that, but then you can't reach out to other people and get that message out.
I mean, I wish sex in our culture was just so much more matter of fact, to be honest. Like, and I wish that the way we talk to young people, like educating about sex and sexuality included, like, what does it mean to be a generous lover? Like, what does that mean? Like educating young people about, look, this isn't just second, it doesn't just sort of come. It's something you have to learn about yourself. You have to have curiosity about yourself. You have to have curiosity and communication with the partner, and really talking about that, not just you should use a condom and make sure you have consent. Like people are just, it might save people from just decades of bad sex, honestly.
Yeah, let alone all the other stuff. But yes, how can we save how can we, the same example, like with my aunt, how can we just fast forward, and get all the knowledge and wisdom instead of living through 50 years of bad sex or no sex, following the rules, but you still can end up. And I've worked with a lot of people, working with clients and people to overcome the sexual shame. And, just last week, somebody was telling me, they said, I followed all the rules. They also were raised in purity culture. They said, I followed all the rules. I did everything I was supposed to. And I was supposed to get to this marriage where I had amazing sex, where I was rewarded for everything I had done right leading up to that moment. And so how then did I end up in this relationship where the person later was, not treated fairly, not respectfully, was not having this amazing mind-blowing sex, whether it's other couples I've talked to where they're like, okay, we got married and then we had to spend 5 years learning how to have sex.
Totally.
Or, total lack of intimacy. How can we spare everybody that through creating this space, this dialogue, and the connection? Like you said, this creates secrecy and separation. How can we create conversation and connection instead?
It's almost like going, driver's ed is very dangerous. So when you get, when you're of age and you are able to buy a car, then you can just start driving, and and you'll know how, and it'll be fine. And it would be so dangerous if you learned anything about driving or had any experience practicing driving before you got behind the wheel of your own car. I mean, it's not a perfect metaphor, but it
is the best metaphor I have heard up until this point.
It just feels like completely illogical. I mean, I have heard that story so many times. When I was doing interviews for my book, I heard that story a lot. I was good. I did exactly what I was told, because you're sold a bill of goods. If you wait, it's going to be so much better. And some fucking hipster pastor talking about his smoking hot wife, Trish, laying down on this stupid stuff for teenagers, if you just wait, it's going to be so much better. And, maybe there are people for whom that's true. I don't know. But you cannot flip a switch on your wedding night and go from relating for most of your life to sex, relating to sex as dirty and dangerous and to be avoided and to not go too far and to always be vigilant and to always check yourself and to not do the bad things. And then you flip a switch on your wedding night and suddenly it's like natural and it's good and everything's flowing and you know what you're doing and it's like fucking fireworks. It doesn't work like that. Oh my God.
It's, yeah. And that whole part, again, where people think, okay, this isn't even about the body, this is about the mind. And like you said, when you've been so deeply ingrained with all that, you can't just, okay, reverse psychology, like liberate yourself from everything you've believed up until this moment in your life. It's now just forget it all. Like now actually go the opposite, try whatever you want, do whatever you want, and forget all that messaging. Like that gear switch is not possible.
No, because you have to detoxify. There has to be a process of detox from that shit.
Somebody here says Trish was the exact name of my college pastor.
You mean his smoking hot one?
That is amazing. I saw somebody. Do we look at the chat? I'm trying to look at the chat, but I'm so bad at reading and speaking at the same time. But if people do have questions, please put your questions in the question box, and then I'll be sure to check the questions thing before we hop off. But yes, exactly that. Like this isn't about the body. This is about the mind and that like muscle memory of trauma or of this messaging. And going back to that driving metaphor, like, okay, yeah, you imagine yourself cruising down the highway, top down, like driving up Malibu, and like actually you end up crashing, and the air bag goes off in your face, and like
you're like, wait, this is a stick shift. I don't know, there's like a clutch and there's gears and you're like
oh yeah, you can't even find the clutch. You can't.
And then
no
it
one
stalls.
knows where the clutch is and how important it is.
And then it stalls.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I'm seeing so many people here relating to this, and that's what I think the most like tragic and beautiful thing about all of this is, again, it transcends any specific denomination or even religion itself. So much of this comes from pop culture and all these other influences, and that was part of my realization as somebody. Yes, there was some religious influence in my life, but beyond that, I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, and literally from one of the most liberal places in the San Francisco Bay Area, if not the world.
Yeah.
And the realization, okay, I think this backwards and have had everything so wrong and have been brainwashed to such an extent. Like, where is everybody else in the world if this is like probably as good as it gets in a sense?
Right. I know. Yeah. I mean, people have, we have a lot of work to do. I mean, for me, I can say that, when I was married and had that whole part of me just shut down, I was kind of priggish. I mean, there was a sense that I was kind of prudish in the sense that I didn't want to be. Jealousy is not my go-to sin. It's not what I default to. I have others. But if I knew someone was having really good sex, like they had a great sex life, I would be insanely jealous. I didn't want to hear people talk about sex. I didn't want to be around any kind of blue humor. I couldn't do it. I was shut down. And so that kind of gives me some compassion for when people, when that part of their lives is hard for them. But also what it's done is made me go, I want for other people, unless they're asexual or just not interested or whatever, I want people to have really good sex. Like I do. Like it's like this pastoral concern actually that I have for people, that I want people in my life to have sexual flourishing. Yeah. And so, and I'm not talking like kink and crazy shit. I mean, and that's fine if people are into that. That's not even what I'm talking about. I'm just saying deeply connected to their sexual psyches and to what ignites that like magical part of them. So if somebody just logged on and heard really good sex, well, welcome.
There you go.
Nice to have you.
Thank you for joining us.
From a 52-year-old Lutheran pastor, you're welcome.
and so it's actually perfect, because what I wanted to say is, you're talking about this desire for, okay, I want people to have really good sex. And what's beyond that? Because it's not just, the sex itself, it's what's underneath and what that represents or celebrates. Like what else is it beyond and beneath that is your desire for people to have as a result?
Right. Well, I mean, I can just say from my own experience, the difference between that part of me being fully alive or completely shut down is that I'm more open as a person. Like everything about me is softer, and my approach to life, my approach to myself, my approach to my body, everything about me is softer. There was a hardness to me years ago that I don't really need anymore. Anne Lamott, in her most recent book, talks about a friend of hers says that when you first meet him, you're really meeting his bodyguard. And I'm obsessed with that idea. So for a long time, my bodyguard was on duty all the time. I mean, I had this emotional exoskeleton that I moved through the world with. And part of it was this deep sadness I didn't want anybody to know about or see, because that part of my life was so shut down. And so, and I don't need that anymore. So that's been a sort of shift for me.
Yeah.
And also the irony is like realizing like some of the messaging I got when I was a kid, I'm like, I don't know, maybe that's actually true. Like for me, like I'm a deeply and very naturally monogamous person. Like it's not an ethic to me. It's very much how I'm wired. So all of that stuff is very much operative in a connection with a very particular person. So it's not up for grabs for anyone else, right? I can't even make myself even somewhat feel that with somebody else. Like it's just not who I am.
Yeah.
And so learning that like some of the stuff that I learned was about like, well, when you feel that safe with somebody, there's this thing that can kind of develop and to grow. And I have had that experience, absolutely, and it keeps deepening. And so I think there's a little bit of humility to go, okay, well, there's this one thing I was taught that I've actually kind of experienced to be true. Most of it was bullshit, but that one thing.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
And what kind of, from my experience and kind of listening to you and from everything I know, I love that word softer and, what's behind the bodyguard or the facade in a way, and connecting with that. And again, going back to that secrecy and separation, like those are ingredients that do not allow for that, for connection.
Right.
And so it sounds as though it created an opportunity for deeper understanding and connection with yourself. And I know that for me, that's kind of where this obsession of wanting to, when I had that moment where I realized, oh my God, everything I know is a lie. And like, I lifted kind of this shame that I hadn't realized I had been holding on to, and that weight was kind of taking off this filter, and like, okay, now I can actually begin to explore and understand myself. And I'm not just talking about like anatomy and physically and pleasure, but sexuality as a way to better understand your own identity and to connect with yourself and your feelings. And I really think this is sort of a cause and effect. And so you can't really reach that, what we'll call really good or great sex, which again is more of like an emotional, spiritual, it's not like a logistical term that we're using.
Right.
Without that connection. And so it's this cause and effect of connection with yourself, love for yourself, acceptance, authenticity allows for this to happen and can be deepened as a result of engaging in that act, that experience, that
absolutely right
connection is deepened, and really creating this cycle that can overcome these other ingredients: shame, separation. I'm like loving the alliteration here. And strengthen the key ingredients that again make us feel good, but that are sometimes hard to reach.
I feel like it maybe another way to say it is that like it allows us to discover that we have more surface area to ourselves than we knew. Do you know what I mean? Like,
and like depth.
There's more to me. There's more to what I'm able to experience, who I'm able to be, than I knew. And that the erotic part of my life in this safe, sort of contained way allows a lot of play within that, so that I can experience myself as more softer, bigger, smaller, than I think I am in my just daily life. Yeah.
More dynamic. And I love that you bring that up, because when people say, oh, what's your expertise, or you're a life coach or a relationship coach or sexuality, and really tying the relationship, sex and sexuality relates to everything. You being a more dynamic version of yourself, not only is that represented in the bedroom in pleasure, or like trying different, desire is more dynamic than you realize. Maybe you do want to try kink or whatever it is, but you as a human being more dynamic and more connected to yourself is something that will impact every area of your life, inside or outside the bedroom. And the same skills and self-awareness and knowledge and communication required for that also have huge benefits, at work, getting a promotion, knowing your own worth, communicate, like all of this, everything is connected and impacted, both as a negative consequence if we can't reach that point, if we're kept from that, and in a positive way if we can tap into and express that more dynamic version of ourselves.
Oh my God, it makes you realize why women's sexuality has been so controlled for so long.
The power behind it.
Seriously.
Honestly. And they should be. We're coming. Well, I know that we're going over a few minutes. I'm not sure if you have a hard cutoff. We have just a couple questions here that actually are both related to each other. If you have time for one question.
Yeah, maybe one. Yeah.
Okay. It's about, what about purity scriptures, or I guess it's essentially says like 1 Thessalonians.
Oh, yeah. 4:3-5. So I'm a Lutheran theologian, and Lutherans just don't have a doctrine that says the cradle that holds Christ. The cradle's not Christ. So as a Lutheran, my understanding of scripture, it's not a legal document where you have to make sure that you're obeying every line of it. It's a library, and it's a family history, and it's poetry, and it's holy text, and it's all of those things. So when people are like, what do you do with this verse? I'm like, look, I don't, as a Lutheran, we believe there's what's called a canon within the canon. And what that means is that the gospel, the story of Jesus, and all of the incredibly powerful aspects to that about forgiveness and mercy and transformation and repentance and renewal and community and, all of those things, that's the point of gravity. If it's like a bullseye, that's the bullseye. So that has the most importance. And anything in scriptures that relates that same message, but maybe isn't about Jesus, but that is the next ring out, right? And so then there are these texts that are kind of on the outside. And so when people are like, well, what about this verse over here? I'm like, I'm really focused in the middle. That stuff, I don't feel like I have to answer to it. Because if it doesn't have that message, it simply doesn't have the same authority. So hopefully that is helpful for people.
Yeah, and I think behind that, it just represents how sometimes we're looking at it's all about perspective. Whether they're looking at the wrong thing, you're like, hey, let's look over here, or we're looking at it from the wrong angle, you know, whether we're seeing the glass half empty instead of half full, or it's just, we don't always necessarily even need to change what we're doing, but how we're thinking about it and judging it, or you know, examining it, how we feel about it. It's perhaps sometimes more than changing what we're doing, changing how we think about it and how we feel about it. So thank you so much for all of that, and for your incredible time here today, and for everybody who tuned in. Thank you to you as well, and for the comments. And please be sure to check out our latest podcast episode with Nadia, and follow us to, you know, continue as we were doing here today, changing the culture and the conversations surrounding intimacy and relationships. So Nadia, thank you for being your beautiful badass self. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye,
Thank
guys.
you.